All right, everybody, welcome back to another session. So, today we are going to be talking about how to set up for your next assignment, the master drawing. So, you can see here on my desk, I've set up my reference image as well as my paper. We'll talk about both of these elements because, of course, these are going to be your ingredients for this assignment. Ooh, excuse me. So first and foremost for this assignment, you do need to remember that we are going to be dealing with kind of one of the classic art assignments back from the days of the European academies of old. If you wanted to be an artist back in the day, you had to enroll in the academy. And of course, you had to enroll in your lower classes before you could then ascend to life drawing and other kinds of disciplines such as painting and architecture and things like that. So in the lower class, your task was to be learning from the artists that came before you. So that's what we're going to be practicing today as well. These artists had to copy from master drawings, master prints, sculptures before they could then draw from life. So we're going to be dealing in a little bit of a nice tradition because, of course, putting yourselves in the shoe of another artist can teach you a lot, not just in terms of practicing physical techniques, practicing your hand-eye coordination, kind of paying attention to how you're handling the pencil, where you should make lines darker, lighter, where you should shade, where you shouldn't shade. This can teach you a lot and kind of encourage you to break outside of your normal comfort zone. So definitely allow yourself to kind of think about that as we're dealing with again our groups of artists. So first and foremost, like I mentioned, you do need to pick an artist. Try to pick an artist that you like, one that whose style or subject matter that you think you could learn a lot from. I tried to include throughout the slide lots of different artists, most notably, again, the important figures within drawing. So of course, go through those slides, skim through them, and pick an artist out that you like. Right? So then once you pick your artist, you're going to need to investigate their work. You can Google your artist name, and then drawings and see what Google image pops up. You can look in the collections of museums. A lot of those have digitized their collections, especially nowadays. So you'll find a lot of different examples of the drawings that that particular artist that made. So for me, I didn't need to do any Googling because I did have a book with some of my artist drawings in them. Again, if you don't have any books with the artist's drawings in them, you can definitely, again, like I said, look online. There's a lot of great resources out there, but I did want to, again, show you guys real quick just because it's easier to show you guys an example side by side here like this. So my artist that I picked was Pontormo. We did look at his work before the break. He was kind of that artist that bridged the gap between Renaissance and Mannerism, and I picked him because I like his style. I like the idea of kind of the drama he gives his figures, so I did want to practice with some of his. So I selected this piece. This is a study of a lower part of a female nude. You can see here that this is a study drawing. You can see that there are some parts that are unfinished. There are other parts that are very lovely and very finished. So that's going to give me a lot of practice when it comes to not only the anatomy, practicing different poses and things like that, but also practicing. There's some hatching, there's some shading, there's a lot of beautiful contours, and it's always good to for me to kind of get those skills going. So that's why I picked this drawing. So once you pick your drawing, you need to make sure that you can see your drawing here because I'm working off of a book. My drawing and my paper are side by side. If you're working off of Google Images or a museum's website, have that website open right next to you while you're working, either on your phone or on your computer, just so that you're able to see, because we're going to be essentially copying what we see here. And remember, sometimes copying might seem a little restrictive, but of course, realize that, again, through copying, we can practice technique, we can practice again getting to know our subjects, and of course drawing in different ways than what we're used to before. So again, it might seem like a rote activity, but you'd be surprised we're going to be using a lot of the same processes that we use when we draw from real life objects for this particular study. So I'm hoping at least you'll pick something that you think is interesting, something you'll get a lot of use out of, and then of course, like I said, copying can teach us a lot and help us with our practice. So again, make sure pick your artist, pick a drawing that they did, have that drawing next to your workspace, and then get out your materials. So for this assignment, your materials will be based on your own tendencies and your own artist, right? Try your best to pick something close to what your artist did. Here you can see that we do have some shading, we do have some hatching. So I'm going to want to pick pencil. And of course, for this piece, I am going to pick my ebony pencil. If you wanted to use other graphite pencils for this particular example, I could do that. Even if I only had a number 2 pencil and a piece of computer paper, I could in theory, come up with a drawing that looks close to this. So again, take a look at what your piece looks like. If you're drawing, if you notice that it uses a lot of really soft values, a lot of soft blending, soft lines, maybe pick some softer pencils. If you notice that there's a lot of really sharp lines, a lot of really kind of fine detail, you might want to pick some harder pencils. And of course, you do have the choice between graphite and charcoal. Think about what's going to look best. When I look at this image, there's a lot of sort of a gray impression here, so I am going to stick with my graphite pencils. But if you notice that there's a lot of really deep, really rich values or rich lines in your drawing, you might want to pick charcoal if you have access to it. If you did want to experiment with other materials, if you have them, you're more than welcome to do so. If you had some pens or some colored pencils or some colored chalks, you could always pepper those in depending on your drawing. But of course, your drawing is going to dictate what you pick. So again, for my drawing, I'm going to work with my old graphite pencil. And of course, I need my eraser. If you want to have your ruler out, that can sometimes be helpful as well. But again, I'm not doing any sort of architecture, any really hard lines. There is a little kind of horizon line, sort of fold line down here that I could use my ruler for. But again, if you guys do choose maybe a Venetian artist that does a lot of architecture, you might want to choose your ruler and get that out so that you're able to emulate that artist's perfectly straight lines. So of course I picked white paper. This is called Stonehenge paper, and it's very smooth on the surface, and it has this kind of rough deckled edge, which is kind of cool. It's kind of an antique sort of look to it. Pick whatever paper you'd like, whatever paper you have access to. A lot of students really like to do this study in their sketchbook because it's kind of sort of a practice exercise in some ways, because again, you're riffing off of what someone else did and you're using this as practice. You're not going to publish this drawing that I make and say, I made this, I came up with everything, right? This is a study off of another artist. So some people like to keep their studies and their practice in their sketchbook. But if you want to do it on loose paper, that could be fine too. Additionally, if you did want to play with colored paper, toned paper, you could do that for this assignment. Again, think about what's here and what could look good here and what's going to translate well. So as I'm going to get started, like I said, make sure that you have a piece of paper that suits your source image, right? Here you can see we have a portrait orientation, so my paper is taller than it is wider. Try to stick to that, otherwise you might run out of room, right? And of course, we're going to use our citing process just like we've done with our other pieces, right? You don't have to reinvent the wheel for this particular assignment. So I'm going to start off with an organizational line drawing. And for our organizational line drawing, do remember that is a very, very simple sketch of everything that you see in front of you, and we're going to be putting it on here. We're going to start off simple and work our way towards complicated, because remember, if you start off with details, if I started off with all the little toes and all the little kind of shadows that are inside the knees, I'd be neglecting kind of the greater area, and I might make mistakes in terms of making things too short, too long, too big, angled differently. So remember, basic sketch first, simple shapes. Again, when we look at these source images, a lot of these artists drew things that were complicated. Human figures, architecture, nature, objects, all these things are very complicated. But remember, just like we did with our still lives, you're going to break them down into simple shapes. Remember, circles, squares, triangles, ovals, whatever shapes you can come up with. So first I'm going to start off with kind of a basic kind of gesture drawing, because you can see I have one leg here and then one leg that's relatively straight. So that's what I'm going to start off with. So remember, if you're having trouble getting this organizational sketch done in 5 minutes, you might want to do some practice gestures, spend a little extra time kind of working on that, because remember, we don't want to spend a really long time on our basic sketch, because this should be a very fast sketch so that we can spend all our time on measuring, on fitting, on adding in those details. So enough talk, let's start drawing. So of course, remember, I'm going to start off with, like I said, an organizational sketch. So I'm going to start off with this straight leg. I'm guessing where I think it's going to be. So there's one leg. I'll kind of imagine the hips to be up here. I'll imagine that there. And then here we go. So again, very fast, very loose, very light-ish, because remember, we don't want to spend all of our time erasing. Some of you guys may choose drawings where the artist left pentimenti in that are more a little bit gestural, a little bit more expressionistic. But for me, I noticed that most of my mess is left behind here. So I definitely want to keep this area sort of cleanish. I don't want to be pressing too hard. I don't want to be indenting the paper. So of course from here you can kind of build on top of your organizational line drawing. For me, before I start building shapes, I want to make sure that I got my angles right for my legs, because again, if one of my legs is dipping too much or tipping too much, that'll definitely kind of destroy the illusion of this whole drawing. And of course you will notice I'm kind of doing sort of a pretty one-to-one ratio. You can make your drawing smaller than your source drawing. You can make it bigger. I'm trying to keep them sort of the same-ish size because that's kind of the size of paper that I happen to have. But remember, the scale really doesn't matter too much. It just matters when you're translating and when you're measuring, and you make sure that you get those relative proportions right, per usual, right? You guys remember with our still lives, you weren't always able to get life size still lives on your page. Sometimes you had to shrink things down. So same thing with this particular piece. So let's do our angles. And of course, here you can see I'm going to take this angle. All right, so I do need to make this a little more kind of straight. Taking my angles and I'm just bringing them over. Again, you guys can see just doing a little bit of our basic sighting, just like we normally do. And then of course my foot kind of tips out a little more like that, right? And then of course this one's relatively straight, but it does have sort of a slight tilt to it, which I neglected to do. But of course, remember, this is all about correction. Right. So now we can figure out our basic proportions, right? Because for this one, I want to make sure that my upper leg and my lower leg and my foot, these proportions are all just so when I translate them on my page before I start to add in the meat of the leg, so to speak, right? So again, we're still organizational line drawing with a little bit of sighting peppered in. So of course, I'm going to measure the top part of my leg, and I'm going to see that this lower leg is a little bit shorter than that unit, right? So I'm going to take them over here, and I need to see that my foot starts here, right? And how big is my foot? Let me see, 1, 2. So 2 feet fit inside this lower leg, right? So here, let's see what I got. So here's half. Not bad. Got that pretty good. Nice. So of course, again, we need to see that this knee is right above this knee. So we got that pretty good, right? And now I just need to check these proportions, right? So of course, got my upper leg. All right, so we can see that's kind of a nice little measurement there. And we got it pretty good. Nice, we're on fire today. All right. So of course, like we said, if it takes you, again, more than 5 minutes to get your basic sketch done, do a couple gestures, kind of increase your speed, do some extra practice, right? The first drawing that you make, you may need to try again, right? That's the point of this, is to study, to practice. So from here, if I wanted to finish off my organizational line drawing, I could then kind of add my really basic shapes, really simplifying things. Again, I know that there's all kinds of complex muscles in the leg and the feet, but right now, since we're just doing our general measurements, our general proportions, I'm just making them big blobs essentially. For my knees, I'm kind of doing these circles. For my thighs, I'm doing just some big ovals. I'm going to make a calf muscle here because I'm fancy. Again, we're just making really big, basic shapes, right? Again, like I said, if it takes you more than 5-ish minutes to get to this point, do some extra gestures, practice setting timers for yourself, anywhere from 15 seconds up to 2 minutes. Practice doing these quick sketches. So again, this is how we set up. We've chosen our artist, we've chosen our image, chosen our materials, and we've established our drawing. The next step, what we're going to be doing is increasing our understanding of sighting, measuring some different angles, and really getting in there and solidifying this drawing through measuring, because again, we have our source image right here. So we're going to be measuring and doing more sighting. So again, this has been setting up and establishing. Make sure that you do this before you get into the details, and we'll be getting onward and upward from here.